The silence in the room was heavier than the gold chandeliers hanging above. 1 minute, Preston Carmichael, the untouchable heir to a billion-dollar empire, was laughing, holding a glass of champagne like a weapon. The next, he was frozen, his face drained of color, staring at the girl he had just called trash. He thought he was playing a game. He thought he could buy a human being's dignity for the price of a laugh. But when Lydia opened her mouth, she didn't just sing. She unleashed a storm that would tear his dynasty apart. This is the story of the note that shattered a billionaire's life. The distinct sound of crystal clinking against silver echoed through the dining hall of the Obsidian, New York City's most exclusive, members-only supper club. It was a sound Lydia Holt knew intimately. It was the soundtrack of her invisibility. Lydia adjusted the collar of her stiff, black uniform. It was a size too big, chafing against her neck. But she didn't complain. Complaining got you fired, and getting fired meant her mother's dialysis treatments would stop. At 24, Lydia had learned that pride was a luxury item, much like the $400 Wagyu steaks she carried on heavy slate trays to men who wouldn't look her in the eye. Tonight, the air in the Obsidian felt sharper, charged with a frantic energy. It was Friday, and the sharks were feeding. Table 4 needs a refill on the Domaine de la Romane Conti, Mr. Henderson, the floor manager, hissed into Lydia's ear. He was a small, nervous man who sweated profusely despite the aggressive air conditioning. And for God's sake, Lydia, fix your hair. A strand is loose. We are not a diner. Yes, Mr. Henderson, Lydia whispered, tucking a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. She moved toward table 4 with the practiced grace of a ghost. She had learned to walk without making a sound, to pour wine without a tremor, and to exist without occupying space. At table 4 sat Preston Carmichael. If you lived in New York, you knew the face. It was plastered on billboards for luxury condos and splashed across the tabloids whenever a model had a public meltdown. Preston was 32, handsome in a predatory way, with jawline sharp enough to cut glass and eyes that looked like they had never blinked at a price tag. He was currently holding court with 3 other men and a woman who looked bored out of her mind. The woman, Tiffany, was scrolling through her phone, ignoring the $5,000 bottle of wine in front of her. "So I told the zoning board," Preston boomed, his voice carrying intentionally over the murmurs of the restaurant. "If you don't approve the demolition, I'll buy the building next door and turn it into a waste processing plant." Guess how fast they signed the permit. The men at the table roared with sycophantic laughter. "You're a savage, Preston," one of them shouted. Lydia approached the table, the bottle of red wine cradled in a white napkin. She waited for a pause in the conversation, the golden rule of service, but the pause never came. Preston was too busy explaining how he had fired an assistant for bringing him sparkling water instead of still. Lydia stepped in during a breath. "More wine, sir?" Preston didn't look up. He waved his hand dismissively, a gesture one might use to swat a fly. In doing so, his heavy gold Rolex caught the edge of Lydia's tray. Crash. The empty wine glass on the edge of the table tipped over. It didn't break, but it rolled off the edge and shattered on the marble floor with a violence that silenced the entire section. The restaurant went dead quiet. Lydia froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, immediately dropping to her knees to pick up the shards. "I'm so sorry, sir." Preston slowly turned his head. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of profound annoyance. He looked at the shattered glass, then down at Lydia, who was scrambling on the floor. "You clumsy little idiot," Preston said, his voice dangerously low. "I apologize, Mr. Carmichael," Lydia said, her hands shaking as she gathered the glass. A sharp shard sliced her thumb, but she didn't dare wince. "I'll clean it up immediately." "It's not about the clean-up," Preston sneered, leaning back in his chair and crossing his legs. He looked at his friends. "See? This is exactly what I was talking about. You can put them in a uniform, but you can't teach them grace. It's genetic. Some people are born to sit at the table, and some are born to clean under it." Tiffany looked up from her phone, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Maybe she's drunk, Preston. She smells like cheap detergent." Lydia bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron. "Don't cry. Do not cry." She focused on the rhythm of her breathing. To calm herself, she did what she always did when the world became too loud. She hummed. It was involuntary, a soft, barely audible vibration in her throat, a melody she practiced in the subway tunnels, in the shower, in the dark of her tiny apartment. It was the Queen of the Night aria, Der Hölle Rock. She didn't realize she was making a sound until a shiny leather shoe pinned her hand to the floor. Lydia gasped, looking up. Preston had stepped on her hand, not hard enough to break bones, but hard enough to trap her. "What was that?" Preston asked, tilting his head. "Sir, please," Lydia whispered, trying to pull her hand back. "No, not that," Preston said, keeping his foot planted. "The noise. You were humming. While cleaning up my floor, you were humming." He looked at his friends. "Did you hear that? The help is musical." I didn't mean to," Lydia stammered. Preston removed his foot, but the look in his eyes changed from annoyance to amusement. A cat who had found a mouse. He stood up, towering over her as she remained on her knees. "Stand up," he commanded. Lydia stood, clutching the bundle of broken glass in her napkin. Her thumb was bleeding through the white cloth. "What were you humming?" Preston demanded. "Nothing, sir. Just a song." "Don't lie to me," Preston snapped. "It sounded classical. Mozart? Are you a fan of Mozart, dishwasher?" "I'm a waitress, sir," Lydia corrected quietly. "And yes, it was the magic flute." The table erupted in laughter. "Oh, this is rich." Preston slapped his knee. "She knows the magic flute. Did you hear it on a cartoon, or perhaps a ringtone?" "I studied it," Lydia said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. A flash of her old life, the conservatory, the stage, the dream that died 3 years ago, flickered in her eyes. Preston stopped laughing. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive scotch and arrogance. "You studied it?" he mocked. "So you think you're a singer? You think because you listened to a CD once, you understand high art?" "I didn't say that." "But you think it," Preston hissed. He turned to the crowded restaurant. The other diners were watching now, sensing the drama. Preston loved an audience. He raised his arms, playing to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston announced, "we have a celebrity in our midst. This waitress, who can't even pour wine without destroying the furniture, claims she is an opera singer." Scattered, nervous laughter rippled through the room. "Preston, sit down," Tiffany said, though she was smiling. "You're making a scene." "I am making an opportunity." Preston grinned. He turned back to Lydia, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I'm bored, darling, and when I'm bored, I like to make bets." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He uncapped a gold fountain pen. "Here is the deal," Preston said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "You claim you know Mozart. The Queen of the Night aria is the hardest piece in the soprano repertoire. High Fs, staccatos. It breaks professionals." He scribbled something on the check. "Sing it," Preston said. "Right now. Here." Lydia shook her head, terrified. "Sir, I can't. I'm working. Mr. Henderson." She looked around for her manager, but Henderson was hiding by the kitchen doors, looking pale. He wouldn't save her. Preston Carmichael spent $500,000 a year at this restaurant. "If you sing it," Preston continued, holding up the check, "and you actually hit the notes, I mean really hit them, not some screeching cat noise, I will give you this check for $50,000, and—" He paused, a wicked idea forming. "I'll marry you." The room gasped. "Excuse me?" Tiffany shrieked. "Relax, Tiff." Preston winked at her. "It's a figure of speech. I mean, I'll take care of you. You'll never have to scrub a floor again. I'll make you a star, if you can do it." Lydia stared at him. $50,000. That was the kidney transplant. That was rent for 3 years. That was freedom. "And if I fail?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. Preston's smile turned shark-like. He pointed to the spot on the floor where the wine had spilled. "If you fail," he said softly, "you get down on your hands and knees, you bark like the dog you are, and you lick that wine off the floor, and then you walk out of here and never come back to this city." The cruelty of it took the air out of the room. It was medieval. It was insane. "Preston, that's too much," one of his friends muttered. "She's a nobody," Preston shouted, suddenly angry. "She thinks she's equal to us? She thinks she understands our culture? Let's see." He turned back to Lydia. "Well, are you a soprano or are you a servant?" Lydia looked at the check. Then she looked at Preston's mocking face. She looked at Tiffany's cruel smirk. She closed her eyes. She thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, fading away. She thought of the voice she had buried 3 years ago because she couldn't afford to dream. She dropped the napkin with the broken glass into a bucket nearby. She wiped her bleeding thumb on her apron. Lydia Holt lifted her chin. "I'll do it," she said. The atmosphere in the obsidian shifted from awkward curiosity to electric tension. Waiters stopped mid-stride. Diners put down their forks. Even the kitchen staff peeked out through the swinging doors. This was the kind of humiliation the wealthy elite secretly craved to witness, a gladiator match, but instead of blood, it was social suicide. Preston laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "She accepts. The mouse roars." He gestured grandly to the center of the room. "The floor is yours, Diver. Don't bore me." Lydia walked to the center of the dining area. The carpet felt soft beneath her cheap, worn-out work shoes. She felt small. She felt dirty in her stained uniform. But as she turned to face the room, something ancient awoke inside her. It was the training. You can take the singer out of the conservatory, but you cannot take the technique out of the singer. Muscle memory took over. She planted her feet shoulder-width apart. She unlocked her knees. She rolled her shoulders back, expanding her ribcage. She wasn't Lydia the waitress anymore. She was the instrument. She looked at Preston. He was leaning back, swirling his wine, expecting a train wreck. He expected her to screech, to crack, to humiliate herself so thoroughly that he would have a funny story to tell at the Hamptons next weekend. He doesn't know, Lydia thought. He doesn't know who I am. She closed her eyes and visualized the score. Der Hölle Rache kocht in meinem Herzen. Hell's vengeance boils in my heart. It was an aria of rage, a mother commanding her daughter to kill. It required a coloratura soprano of immense agility and power. It required hitting a high F6, a note that sat in the stratosphere of the human vocal range. The room was dead silent, a silence waiting to be broken. Lydia took a deep breath. She didn't start tentatively. She attacked. The first chord of the aria is usually an orchestral explosion. Without an orchestra, Lydia had to be the explosion. Der Hölle Rache kocht in meinem Herzen. The sound that came out of her mouth was not the voice of a malnourished waitress. It was a cannon blast. It was rich, resonant, and terrifyingly clear. Preston's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Lydia opened her eyes. They were blazing. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was staring directly at Preston Carmichael. Tod und Verzweiflung, Tod und Verzweiflung, flammet mich her. Death and despair flame about me. The German diction was flawless. Every consonant was a percussion instrument. Every vowel was a bell. The volume was immense. Unamplified, her voice filled every corner of the high-ceilinged room, bouncing off the mahogany walls and rattling the silverware. Preston sat up straight. The smirk fell off his face as if it had been slapped away. Tiffany's jaw actually dropped. Lydia moved through the recitative section, the anger in her voice palpable. She was channeling every insult, every unpaid bill, every moment of invisibility into the music. She was the queen of the night, and Preston was the obstacle. Then came the moment. The legendary run. The vocal acrobatics that separated the amateurs from the masters. She climbed the scale, fast, precise, staccato. Ha 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 ha. The notes were laser beams, sharp, distinct, perfectly tuned. She hit the high C, then the D, climbing higher and higher with terrifying ease. The audience was paralyzed. This wasn't just good karaoke singing. This was world-class opera. This was the kind of voice you paid $500 a ticket to hear at the Met. Lydia approached the high F, the note that broke careers. She didn't hesitate. She didn't strain. She launched herself into the air. She hit the F6. It was a sound of pure, crystalline perfection. It pierced the air, sharp and ringing, suspending time. It was a note that vibrated in the teeth of everyone in the room. She held it. She held it longer than the score required. She held it while staring directly into Preston Carmichael's soul. "You thought I was nothing," the note said. "You thought you could break me." In that high, shimmering frequency, the power dynamic in the room flipped completely. Preston shrank. He looked small in his expensive suit. He looked like a child who had opened a door and found a dragon. Lydia cascaded down the scale, finishing the phrase with a low, growling resolve. "Hört, reiche Götter! Hört der Mutter Schwur! Hear gods of vengeance! Hear a mother's oath!" She cut the final note off with a razor-sharp consonant. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. For 3 seconds nobody moved. The air in the room felt vacuum-sealed. Then a single person started clapping. It was an elderly man in the corner. Professor Galloway, a retired conductor who dined there every Friday. He stood up, tears in his eyes. Then another person stood. Then another. Suddenly, the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. People were standing on their chairs. The kitchen staff had come out and were cheering. It was pandemonium. Lydia stood in the center of the storm, her chest heaving, sweat beading on her forehead. She felt dizzy. She looked at table 4. Preston was not clapping. He was pale, his hands gripping the tablecloth so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like he was about to be sick. Lydia walked over to the table. The applause quieted down as people watched, desperate to see the conclusion of the bet. She stopped in front of Preston. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She extended her hand, palm up. "The check," Lydia said. Her voice was calm, contrasting with the operatic fire she had just displayed. "And the proposal." Preston stared at her. His ego was fractured, and his brain was scrambling for a way out. He was a Carmichael. Carmichaels didn't lose to waitresses. It was a joke," Preston stammered, his voice weak. "The room heard you," Lydia said. $50,000. Preston looked around. Dozens of phones were pointed at him. He realized with a jolt of horror that this was all being recorded. If he welched on a bet now, After being so arrogant, he would be the laughingstock of Wall Street by morning. With trembling hands, he ripped the check he had scribbled on out of the book. He threw it on the table. "Take it!" he spat. "Take it and get out! You're fired!" "You can't fire me," Lydia said, picking up the check. "I don't work for you. I work for Mr. Henderson." She looked at the manager. Henderson, emboldened by the crowd, looked at Preston, then at Lydia. "Actually, Mr. Carmichael, she's right, and I think you've had enough to drink tonight." The crowd gasped again. The obsidian was kicking out Preston Carmichael. Preston's face turned purple. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You think you won?" he hissed at Lydia, leaning in close so only she could hear. "You think this money changes anything? You're still a nobody, and I will make sure you never sing in this city again. I will bury you." "You already tried to bury me, Preston," Lydia whispered back, a strange intensity in her eyes. 3 years ago, at the Juilliard Conservatory scholarship hearings, does the name Arthur Carmichael ring a bell? Preston froze. His eyes went wide. "My name isn't just Lydia," she said softly. "It's Lydia Vane. My mother was Sarah Vane, the woman your father destroyed." Preston stepped back as if physically struck. "I'll take the money," Lydia said, loud enough for the camera phones to hear. "Consider it a down payment on what your family owes mine." She turned on her heel and walked away, the check clutched in her hand, leaving the billionaire speechless amidst the ruins of his ego. But the story wasn't over. It was just beginning, because the video was already uploading, and by morning, the world would know the waitress soprano. Lydia didn't go home. She couldn't. The adrenaline was shaking her body apart. She walked 4 blocks to a 24-hour diner, ordered a black coffee, and stared at the check. $50,000. It was real. The ink was wet. Her phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it began to vibrate continuously, a steady hum against the Formica table. She picked it up. She had 3 text messages from her friend, Chloe. "Lydia, OMG. Link, you are trending on Twitter." Lydia clicked the link. It was a TikTok video captioned, "Waitress ends arrogant billionaire with opera. Must watch." It had 2.4 million views, and it had been posted an hour ago. Lydia scrolled through the comments. Who is she? Give her a record deal now. The guy is Preston Carmichael. I recognize him. What a dirtbag. That high F just cleared my skin and watered my crops. Does anyone know her name? Internet, do your thing. Lydia felt a wave of nausea. She wanted the money for her mum, but she hadn't planned on the fame. Fame was dangerous. Fame meant scrutiny. And scrutiny meant people would dig into her past, the past she had changed her name to hide. The next morning, the storm broke. Lydia was at the hospital, sitting by her mother's bedside. Sarah Vane, once a promising contralto, was now a shadow of herself, hooked up to dialysis machines. "Lydia?" Sarah whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "Why are there news vans outside?" Lydia froze. She walked to the window and peered through the blinds. Down on the street, a swarm of reporters was camped out at the hospital entrance. How did they find her so fast? "I sang, Mom," Lydia said, sitting back down. "I sang for Preston Carmichael." Sarah's face went pale. "Carmichael. Lydia, no. You promised. You promised you'd stay away from that family. They are vipers." "He challenged me, Mom. He humiliated me. I couldn't stop it." Lydia held up the check. "But I got the money. We can pay for the transplant list now." Sarah didn't look happy. She looked terrified. "Arthur will see this. Arthur will know." "Let him know," Lydia said, her voice hardening. I'm not a scared 21-year-old student anymore. Just then, Lydia's phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello? Ms. Lydia Vane? A crisp female voice spoke. This is Evelyn Crouch, Senior Counsel for Carmichael Industries. Lydia's stomach dropped. What do you want? We have seen the video, the lawyer said. And we are aware of the check Mr. Preston gave you. We are calling to inform you that Mr. Carmichael was intoxicated and under duress. The wager is not legally binding. If you attempt to cash that check, we will sue you for extortion, defamation, and theft. It's not theft, Lydia said, her hand gripping the phone. There were witnesses. We have witnesses too, the lawyer said smoothly. Mr. Carmichael's associates will testify that you provoked him and took advantage of his altered state. Furthermore, we are prepared to release the sealed files from your expulsion from Juilliard, the drug allegations, the theft charges. Lydia gasped. Those were lies. Preston's friends planted those drugs in my locker. Can you prove that? The lawyer asked. Because the police report says otherwise. We can destroy your reputation before you even start, Miss Vane. Or what? Or you sign a non-disclosure agreement. You publicly state the video was a staged prank for social media. You return the check, and in exchange, we give you $10,000 for your time. 10,000? Lydia laughed bitterly. That won't even cover a month of bills. It's better than prison, Miss Vane. You have 24 hours to decide. The line went dead. Lydia looked at her mother. Sarah was sleeping again, her breathing ragged. The Carmichaels were doing it again. They were using their money to rewrite the truth. They thought they could bully her into silence. Lydia looked at the check in her hand. Then she looked at her phone. The video views were now at 5 million. She wasn't going to sign the NDA. She wasn't going to hide. She opened the browser on her phone and found the contact email for the biggest investigative journalist in New York, a man named Tom Brady, no relation to the athlete, who hated the Carmichael family. She began to type. Subject, the waitress soprano. The truth about Preston Carmichael. Body. You saw the video. Now hear the story. My name is Lydia Vane. 3 years ago, Preston Carmichael framed me to get me kicked out of Juilliard so his girlfriend could take my spot. I have proof. And I'm ready to talk. She hit send. The war had begun. The coffee shop where Lydia agreed to meet the journalist was in Brooklyn, far away from the gleaming spires of Manhattan where the Carmichaels reigned as gods. It was a small, dusty place that smelled of roasted beans and damp raincoats. Tom Brady sat in the back booth. He didn't look like a knight in shining armor. He looked tired. He was in his 50s, wearing a rumpled corduroy jacket, tapping furiously on a laptop that looked like it had survived a war zone. When Lydia slid into the booth opposite him, he didn't smile. He just pushed a recording device across the table. "You're the soprano," Tom said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Lydia replied, keeping her hands in her lap to hide the shaking. "Did you get my email?" "I get 1,000 emails a day, kid. Most of them are trash. Yours." He paused, looking her in the eye. "Yours mentioned the Juilliard incident of 2021. The cocaine cantata, they called it." Lydia flinched. The memory was a physical blow. "That's what the tabloids called it. It wasn't true." "I know," Tom said, surprisingly soft. "I covered that story, or tried to. My editor killed it. Said Carmichael Industries pulled their ad revenue if we ran a sympathy piece on a drug-addled student. I always knew something smelled rotten." "Tell me everything." For the next 2 hours, Lydia spoke. She told him about her first year at the conservatory, how she had been the scholarship kid, the outsider with the worn-out shoes and the voice that made professors weep. She told him about Preston Carmichael, who was auditing classes not because he had talent, but because his father had donated a new wing to the building. "He hit on me," Lydia said, staring at her cold coffee, relentlessly. He wasn't used to hearing no. When I rejected him in front of his friends, his ego couldn't take it. A week later, security found 3 ounces of cocaine taped under my locker shelf. An anonymous tip. And the expulsion was immediate, Tom filled in. No hearing, no appeal. Arthur Carmichael, Preston's father, sat on the board. He said he had a zero-tolerance policy. They kicked me out, stripped my scholarship, and blacklisted me from every major conservatory on the East Coast. My mother, the stress caused her first stroke. Tom turned off the recorder. His face was grim. "You know what happens if we run this? They will come for you. Not with lawyers this time. They'll dig up every skeleton, every unpaid parking ticket, every ex-boyfriend. They will try to paint you as a mentally unstable gold digger." "I don't care about me," Lydia said. "I need that check to clear. I need the money for my mum. And I need them to stop thinking they own the world." Tom nodded slowly. "Okay. We go live tonight. But Lydia, don't read the comments." Tom's article dropped at 6 p.m. It wasn't just a blog post, it was a scorched earth expose on the front page of the New York Chronicle's digital edition. The headline read, "The Aria of Lies, How the Carmichaels Silenced a Prodigy." The internet did not just break, it shattered. The video of Lydia singing had been the spark, but the article was the gasoline. People love a talent, but they worship an underdog. The narrative shifted instantly. Lydia wasn't just a waitress with a cool voice anymore. She was a martyr, a victim of the billionaire class. By the next morning, North to justice. For Lydia was the #1 trending topic globally. Lydia sat by her mother's hospital bed, watching the news on her phone. "Preston Carmichael has not been seen since the incident," a news anchor announced. However, stock prices for Carmichael Industries took a 2% dip this morning as protesters gathered outside their Midtown headquarters playing opera music on loudspeakers. Lydia allowed herself a small, grim smile. It was working, but silence from a predator is rarely a sign of retreat. It is usually a sign that they are hunting. Around noon, a massive bouquet of white lilies was delivered to the hospital room. There was no card, just the flowers. "Are these from your fans?" Sarah asked weakly from the bed. Lydia frowned. White lilies were funeral flowers. She examined the bouquet. Buried deep in the stems, she found a small, heavy velvet box. She opened it. Inside was a diamond necklace. It was stunning, easily worth 6 figures. Under the diamond lay a small, folded note on thick, cream-colored stationery. Lydia unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, jagged, and aggressive. "You have a beautiful voice. It would be a shame if something happened to your throat. Meet me. Tonight. 9 p.m. The Obsidian. The private room. Come alone, or the lawyer calls the police about the theft of this necklace." P. Lydia dropped the box as if it were burning. It was a trap, a bribe, and a threat wrapped in one. He was trying to frame her again. If she kept the necklace, they'd say she stole it. If she went to the police, they'd say she was hallucinating. She had to go. She had to face him. "Mum," Lydia said, standing up and grabbing her coat. "I have to go to work." "Be careful, Liddy," her mother whispered. "I have a bad feeling." "I'm not afraid of him anymore," Lydia lied. She walked out of the hospital, the diamond necklace burning a hole in her pocket. She wasn't going to wear it. She was going to shove it down Preston Carmichael's throat. The Obsidian was closed to the public that night. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, and the private event sign hung on the brass handles. Lydia pushed the door open. It was unlocked. The restaurant was dark, illuminated only by a few dim sconces on the walls. The tables were empty, stripped of their tablecloths. The silence was heavy, oppressive. "Preston!" Lydia called out. Her voice echoed in the emptiness. "In the back," a voice replied. Lydia walked toward the private dining room at the rear. She clutched her pepper spray in her pocket, her knuckles white. She entered the private room. A single round table was set for two. Candles flickered in the center. A bottle of wine, the same $5,000 vintage from the other night, sat open. Preston was sitting there. But he looked different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, disheveled energy. His tie was undone, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 48 hours. "You came," he said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. His hand shook slightly. "I brought your bribe back," Lydia said, tossing the velvet box onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "If you think you can buy my silence with jewelry, you don't know me at all." Preston laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Buy your silence?" "Lydia, that wasn't a bribe. That was a proposal." Lydia froze. "What?" "I told you," Preston said, standing up and walking around the table. He moved erratically. "I said, 'Sing this and I'll marry you.' You sang it. You won. I'm a man of my word." "You're insane." Lydia stepped back. "You tried to destroy me. You kicked me out of school." "That wasn't me," Preston shouted. The outburst was sudden and violent. He slammed his hand on the table. "That was him. That was my father." Lydia stared at him. "You were the one who harassed me, Preston." "Yes, I was a spoiled brat. I wanted you. But when I complained to my dad that a scholarship girl embarrassed me, I thought he'd just pull your funding. I didn't know he'd plant drugs. I didn't know he'd ruin your life." Preston ran a hand through his hair. "He destroys everything I touch, Lydia. He manages my life, my girlfriends, my career. When that video went viral, he didn't get mad at you. He got mad at me. He told me I was weak." Preston looked at her, his eyes wild. "Don't you see? If I marry you, it ruins his plan. He wants me to marry Senator Holloway's daughter, a merger. If I marry the waitress soprano, it's the ultimate rebellion. We can burn his legacy down together." Lydia looked at him with a mixture of horror and pity. He was broken. He wasn't a villain. He was a puppet whose strings were tangled. "I don't want to marry you, Preston," Lydia said quietly. "I want my life back. I want you to admit what you did. Publicly." "I can't," Preston whispered. "He'll cut me off. I'll have nothing." "Then you're a coward," Lydia said. "And you're poorer than I am." She turned to leave. "Sit down, Miss Vane." A new voice boomed from the shadows of the corner. Lydia spun around. Emerging from the darkness was Arthur Carmichael. He was older than his pictures, his skin papery and grey. But his eyes were sharp, cold blue steel. He leaned on a cane with a silver handle shaped like a cobra. 2 large men in dark suits stepped out from behind him. Bodyguards. Preston shrank back into his chair, looking like a terrified child. "Dad, I was handling it." "You were begging," Arthur spat. He looked at Lydia with a gaze that made her feel like an insect under a microscope. "So, this is the siren. Sarah Vane's daughter. You look just like her. Same defiant chin, same foolish pride." "Leave my mother out of this," Lydia said, her voice trembling but loud. "Oh, I can't do that." Arthur smiled thinly. "Your mother and I have history." "Why do you think I was so quick to expel you, Lydia?" It wasn't just because Preston was upset. It was because I couldn't stand the thought of her daughter succeeding in my world. Lydia's breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" "Ask her," Arthur said. "Ask her about the summer of 1995. Ask her who paid for her first apartment. We were quite close, until she developed a conscience and threatened to expose my business dealings." Lydia felt the room spin. "I destroyed her career to silence her," Arthur said casually, as if discussing the weather. "And then you showed up, singing like an angel, threatening to drag the Carmichael name through the mud again. I had to stop it." He stepped closer. "And I will stop it now. The check Preston wrote you, I've cancelled it. The bank has flagged it as fraud. And if you continue with this media crusade, I will ensure the hospital accidentally unplugs your mother's dialysis machine." Lydia gasped. "You wouldn't." "I own the hospital, my dear," Arthur whispered. "I own the board. I own the power grid. I can make the lights go out any time I want." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. "Here is a new check," Arthur said, "for $100,000. Take it. Leave New York. Take your mother to, I don't know, Ohio. Let her die in peace. And never speak the name Carmichael again." Lydia looked at the check. Then she looked at Preston, who was staring at the floor, defeated. She looked at Arthur, the face of pure, unchecked evil. She realized then that singing wouldn't save her. The viral video wouldn't save her. These people played by rules that didn't apply to humans. "I need time," Lydia said, her voice barely a whisper. "You have until tomorrow morning," Arthur said. "If that blog post isn't taken down by 9 a.m., the hospital experiences a power surge." He dropped the check on the table. "Come, Preston, we're leaving." Arthur turned and walked out. Preston hesitated, looking at Lydia one last time, a look of desperate apology, before following his father like a beaten dog. Lydia was left alone in the dark restaurant. She had the money, but the price was her soul and her mother's life. Lydia didn't sleep. She sat in the hospital chair, watching the monitors beep. Every fluctuation in her mother's heart rate made her jump. He owns the hospital. The threat echoed in her mind. She couldn't run. Moving her mother now would kill her. She couldn't fight. Arthur was too powerful. Or was he? She remembered something Preston had said. "He wants me to marry Senator Holloway's daughter. A merger." Lydia pulled out her phone and searched. Carmichael Holloway engagement party. It was tonight, a masquerade ball at the Plaza Hotel, the social event of the season. It was where the merger between Carmichael Industries and Holloway Tech would be finalized. Billions of dollars were on the line. Arthur cared about one thing: his legacy, his money, his public image in front of the people who actually mattered, the senators, the investors, the elite. He didn't care about TikTok. He cared about the plaza. Lydia looked at her sleeping mother. "I'm going to sing one last time, Mum," she whispered. She texted Tom, the journalist. "I need a favor. Can you get me into the plaza tonight?" Tom replied 3 minutes later. "I can get you in the kitchen. Catering staff. Why? I'm going to crash the party." The Plaza Ballroom was a sea of silk, velvet, and diamonds. Guests wore elaborate Venetian masks, hiding their identities as they drank champagne and gossiped. Lydia was dressed in a waiter's uniform again, white jacket, black bow tie. It was the perfect disguise. To these people, servants were invisible. She moved through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her face hidden behind a simple black domino mask she had bought at a party store. She scanned the room. On the raised dais at the front, Arthur Carmichael held court. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wanted everyone to know who he was. Beside him, stood Preston, looking miserable in a tuxedo, and a beautiful, bored-looking woman, presumably the senator's daughter. The orchestra was playing a polite waltz. The atmosphere was stiff, controlled. Arthur was micromanaging every second. Lydia made her way toward the stage. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it would bruise her ribs. She had a small lapel microphone taped to the inside of her jacket, connected to the sound system. Tom had bribed the audio technician with $500. It was a gamble, but it was all she had. She reached the side of the stage. The orchestra finished their song. Arthur stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, beaming, "thank you for joining us to celebrate the union of two great families. My son, Preston." Preston stepped forward, looking like he was walking to the gallows. "Has finally decided to grow up," Arthur joked. The crowd chuckled politely. "Tonight, we look to the future. A future of prosperity, order, and..." Click. The sound system popped. Lydia pulled the microphone from her jacket. She stepped out from the shadows, climbing the stairs onto the stage. She was still wearing the waiter's uniform. She hadn't taken off the mask. "A future of lies?" Lydia's voice rang out over the speakers, interrupting Arthur. The crowd gasped. Murmurs rippled through the ballroom. "Who is that? Is this part of the show?" Arthur froze. He squinted at the figure in the waiter's uniform. "Security," he barked. "Remove this person." "Wait," Preston shouted. He recognized the voice. He stepped between Lydia and the approaching security guards. "Let her speak." "Preston, sit down!" Arthur roared, his face turning red. Lydia ripped off her mask. She let it fall to the floor. "You know who I am, Arthur," Lydia said, her voice amplified, filling the massive hall. "And you know what you did." She turned to the crowd. Senator Holloway was staring at her. The investors were watching. "My name is Lydia Vane," she said. "I am the waitress your son bet $50,000 he could humiliate. I am the student you framed with drugs to protect your ego. And I am the daughter of the woman you are currently threatening to kill in a hospital bed." The silence in the plaza was different from the silence in the restaurant. This was the silence of a bomb about to go off. "She's crazy," Arthur shouted, grabbing the podium. "She's a stalker. Cut the mic." But the sound guy, checking his bank account on his phone, didn't cut the mic. "He told me if I didn't leave town," Lydia continued, "he would pull the plug on my mother's life support. That is the man you are doing business with, Senator. A murderer." "Liar!" Arthur lunged at her, raising his cane. It was a mistake. In his anger, he forgot the cameras. He forgot the optics. He looked like a madman attacking a young woman. Preston moved. For the first time in his life, Preston Carmichael didn't flinch. He caught his father's arm in midair. "Stop," Preston said. His voice was deep, shaking with years of suppressed rage. "Let go of me, you ungrateful whelp," Arthur hissed. "I said stop." Preston shoved his father back. Arthur stumbled, losing his balance, and fell hard onto the stage. The crowd screamed. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. Preston turned to Lydia. He looked at her uniform. He looked at the crowd. He took the microphone from her hand. "She's telling the truth," Preston said. His voice broke, then strengthened. "Everything she said is true. My father framed her. He threatened her. And I let him. Because I was weak." He looked at Senator Holloway. "Sir, you don't want to merge with this company. The books are cooked. The environmental reports are faked. And the CEO is a monster." Arthur struggled to his feet, his face purple. "You're disowned. You hear me? You have nothing." "I never had anything," Preston said sadly. "I just had your money." He turned to Lydia. "You wanted me to sing a different tune, Lydia? How was that?" Lydia looked at him. tears welling in her eyes. "Better," she whispered. "Much better." Then she turned to the orchestra. She nodded at the conductor, who was looking on in fascination. He knew the score. It was La Traviata, the Brindisi, the drinking song. But it was also a song about freedom. "Play," Lydia commanded. The music started, and Lydia sang. She didn't sing with anger this time. She sang with joy. She sang with the relief of the truth finally being free. Her voice soared over the stunned crowd, over the ruined billionaire on the floor, over the flashing cameras. Preston joined in. He wasn't an opera singer. His voice was rough, untrained baritone. But he sang loud. He sang with her. It was the strangest duet in the history of New York high society. A waitress and a fallen prince, singing Verdi while the empire crumbled around them. The fallout was nuclear. Preston's public confession, caught on tape by 300 of New York's most influential people, was the nail in the coffin. Senator Holloway pulled out of the deal before the dessert was served. The SEC launched an investigation into Carmichael Industries the next morning, based on Preston's comments about the cooked books. Arthur Carmichael was removed as CEO by the board of directors within 48 hours. He was currently under house arrest, facing charges of fraud, intimidation, and attempted extortion. Lydia's mother was moved to a different hospital, a better one, paid for by an anonymous donor, though Lydia suspected it was the Holloway family, grateful for dodging a bullet. The threat was gone. 3 weeks later, Lydia was working, but not at the Obsidian. She was standing on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera House. It was an audition, but the seats were full. The director had invited her personally. She finished her aria, Puccini this time. "Oh mio babbino caro." The applause was polite, professional, and genuine. As she walked out the stage door into the crisp autumn air of Lincoln Center, a figure was waiting for her. It was Preston. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore jeans and a leather jacket. He looked younger, lighter. "I heard you crushed it," he said, leaning against a lamp post. "I did okay," Lydia smiled. "They offered me a role in the chorus for the spring season. It's a start." "That's great, Lydia, really." "What about you?" she asked. "How's life as a pauper?" Preston shrugged. "It's weird. I have to do my own laundry. I drive a Honda. I'm working as a consultant for a non-profit music school in the Bronx, helping kids get scholarships." He smiled, a real smile this time. "It's the first time I've ever done work that actually matters." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a check. He pulled out a single, slightly crumpled piece of paper. "I found this in my old files," he said. "It's the original police report from your expulsion. I found the unredacted version my dad hid. It proves the security guard was paid off. I sent it to Juilliard. They're going to restore your degree. Honorary." Lydia took the paper. Her hands trembled. This was more valuable than the $50,000. This was her name. "Thank you," she whispered. "And," Preston said, looking down at his shoes, "about that other promise." "Which one?" "The sing this and I'll marry you part." Lydia laughed. It was a bright, musical sound. "Preston, you are broke, unemployed, and your last name is a PR nightmare. You are a terrible catch." "I know," Preston grinned, "but I make really good pasta. And I know a guy who can get us free tickets to the opera." Lydia looked at him. The man who had been her monster, who became her enemy, and then her unlikely ally. She saw the change in him, the humility. "I'm not going to marry you, Preston," she said, stepping closer. His face fell slightly. "Not yet," she added. "Ask me again when you've learned how to pronounce Der Höllerach correctly." Preston laughed. "Deal." He held out his arm. Walk you to the subway?" "I'd like that," Lydia said. She took his arm. Together, the waitress soprano and the ex-billionaire walked down the street, disappearing into the rhythm of the city, while the music of the city played on around them. The curtain falls, and that is how a single note shattered a glass ceiling and an empire. Lydia proved that dignity isn't something you can buy, and talent isn't something you can suppress. Preston learned that true worth comes from standing up for what's right, even if it costs you everything you thought you owned. What do you think? Did Preston deserve a second chance? Would you have taken the money or exposed the truth? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy drama coming up next week about a CEO who fires his own wife without realizing it. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.